It is Christmas Day here in Mae Sot, Thailand. So Merry Christmas to everyone out there. I had plans today to go on a scooter day trip to a place called the Blue Cave. But at the last minute I changed my mind and I postponed that trip until tomorrow or maybe the next day. And I decided to spend Christmas just relaxing here in Mae Sot. And I eventually made my way out to the This Is a Book coffee shop once again. And I found myself a quiet and comfortable spot by the pond, enjoying my iced latte. And I thought I would do a little fireside chat about the Christmas traditions that I grew up with as a boy in Canada. This is the setting, by the way. That's the view of the pond directly ahead of me. And I'm sitting on this walkway between the coffee shop and another little shop that they have set up over there. And I'm sitting in a chair just like these ones, but I have mine in the shade. And just to my right is the This Is a Book coffee and library bar just over there. That's the main entrance. I thought about doing this video just because it is Christmas and I'm here in Thailand. And of course, I don't have friends and family around me right now to enjoy a traditional Christmas. And it kind of put me in a contemplative mood, though it doesn't take much to get me into a contemplative mood. That's kind of my default position, but even more so than usual, I guess. And I started thinking about Christmas. And in particular, I was thinking about Christmas gift giving because I've been lucky enough through my YouTube channel to get to know quite a few people around the world. And people have sent me gifts here in Mae Sot, such as the famous six-pack of vanilla Coke that arrived a few days ago. And a friend of mine, Brett, dropped by yesterday, and he gave me an amazing gift, a 512 gigabyte micro SD card that I can use in my new phone, because I use this phone for all of my video editing now, and there's a real problem with memory, like running out of memory on the phone. And I tried to find a large capacity card, but I couldn't find one anywhere in Mae Sot. And I guess Brett heard me talking about that on a video, and he was kind enough to pick one up for me, and he hand delivered it yesterday. So that, plus a Santa hat that came in the mail, and a tin of butter cookies, and of course the two very famous GoPros that are on their way from New York right now. So I've actually gotten a lot of gifts here in Mae Sot, despite being far away from home at Christmas time. So that's been a really wonderful thing. And I started thinking about Christmas gift giving, and I wondered maybe if people around the world who watch some of my videos don't even know how that works in Canada. They might see Christmas traditions as portrayed in Hollywood movies, and that might be their only knowledge of Christmas in Canada or the United States. And for me, my experience is completely different. The Christmas traditions that I see in American movies are profoundly different from my own memories of Christmas when I was growing up in Canada. We had completely different approaches to it. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. One thing about Christmas for me was that it really wasn't just a one-day event. It was as far away from a one-day event as you can get. It was easily the biggest holiday for me in Canada. It kind of dominated the year. Thinking about Christmas, anticipation for Christmas, and it marked the end of the year as well, because it occurred on December 25th, and that was kind of the end of the year. Plus, we're just leading into the New Year holidays and the beginning of the new year. So that date and that holiday was just loaded with significance, and looked forward to it all year round. And my mother was the master of gift giving by far. And she would be thinking about giving gifts a year in advance. I'm not joking that she would be thinking year round about the proper gifts for Christmas, planning far ahead, and then she would see something that one of her children, or of course her husband, or another relative, she knew they would enjoy this item, whatever it is, and rather than postpone that thought and think, oh, I will get it, 11 months from now when Christmas comes, she would get it at that time and pack it away, hide it in one of her many hiding places all over the house that we kids never knew about. And then she would keep those gifts the whole year, saving them for Christmas. So the entire year she was planning ahead for the Christmas gift exchange tradition that we had in our family. And that was pretty amazing. That was a pretty amazing thing. And it really was about exchanging gifts. In these American movies, what you see is the children waking up on Christmas morning. They were barely able to sleep the night before with excitement, thinking about all the stuff that they're going to get. And then they would just jump out of bed as first thing Christmas morning and race down to the Christmas tree. And then just all of them at once, like a pack of hyenas, would just tear open all these presents and then just sort of grab everything that was given to them. And that was always the focus in these movies. And I never liked the way they portrayed Christmas, because I know that for me and for my family in general, of course, it's a pleasure to be given a gift, but it was just as much or even more about giving gifts to other people. And as I said, a lot of thought and planning went into this gift giving for my mother and for me and for everyone in my family. So thinking about gifts, thinking about what the other person would like, would start months for some people and weeks in advance for everyone. And thinking about what we can give the other person and what would give them pleasure was a big part of Christmas for us. And I would argue even more, much more, than the thought of what we were going to get for Christmas. It was an exchange of gifts, and that kind of giving to other people was a big part, is a big part of Christmas in Canada, I find, even today. Thinking about how far in advance the gift giving began, the thinking about gift giving, also makes me think of the different roles for mothers and fathers in the Christmas holidays. And remember, I'm talking about quite a long time ago. This is when I was a kid growing up. So we're talking about the 60s and the 70s, and then kind of moving into the early 80s. So it's that period of time that I'm talking about, 60s and 70s and 80s. And of course, my mother was the true master of ceremonies when holidays occurred. She would do all the planning, and she was kind of the source of all of our family traditions surrounding Christmas and surrounding all the other holidays. But my father also had his role to play. He was, for example, the photographer. Maybe I inherited my love of cameras from him, and it was his job as dad, I think it's the job of most dads, to record everything. So they're the ones with the camera taking pictures at Christmas time, taking video at Christmas time, whatever camera equipment that he had. And as the dad, of course, it was his job to put up the Christmas lights. And this was a big part of Christmas in Canada, how you would decorate your house with Christmas lights. And of course, and as I said, that was Dad's job, and he would have to dig out the big box of all the Christmas lights. And there was much discussion in November and then into December. How soon was too soon to put up the Christmas lights? When should we do it? And we finally, choose a weekend when Dad is going to put up the lights, and all the kids would gather around as we open up the big box of Christmas lights from the previous year. And of course, at the end of the holidays last year, you take down all the lights a little bit carelessly, because the holiday is over. But then you stuff them all into the box, put them away for next year. So when you open them up the following year for Christmas, the first thing you have to do, of course, is untangle them, because the Christmas lights are on these long strings and they're all incredibly difficult to get out of their knots and get them straightened out. And of course, a whole bunch of lights have burnt out in the meantime, so we have to untangle all the Christmas lights, plug them in inside the house, and then you can see how many lights are burned out. And then, of course, there's this huge adventure as you try and find replacement lights that fit the socket for your particular Christmas lights, because you might have bought them 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Who knows how old these light strings are, and do they still make the bulbs that fit into the string that you have? So off we go to the hardware stores, buying these packages of replacement bulbs and bringing them home and trying to plug them in. And if they don't fit, we have to go back to the store and buy new ones. And sometimes, of course, you can't find them at all, and then you have to buy brand new lights, so that's always a very exciting thing. And then Dad has got the ladder out, and he's got the ladder against the house with his hammer and his nails, and fixing the old nails where the lights were strung the previous year, hammering in new nails for the new lights. And then he would, string the Christmas lights all around the windows of our house. Of course, some houses in Canada make a huge deal out of this, and the entire house is lit up with lights, and trees are lit up, and there are statues like a manger scene or a Santa Claus scene in the yard, and those would all be draped in lights as well. And one tradition every year for Christmas, I think for most families, is to, at some point, the whole family piles into a car, and then at night when it's dark, you drive around your home city to look at the lights at all the other houses. And certain houses are known every year for having the most spectacular displays, and they would even end up in the local paper. So my parents would plan exactly where to go. We have to drive around the city, and we would go directly to the houses that had the most spectacular displays. So that was another Christmas tradition every year for many families, just to drive around and look at all the Christmas decorations in the parks, done by the city, at churches, at individual homes all over the place. So that was Dad, Dad putting up the lights and making sure the camera has batteries and he has fresh film for the holidays. My dad was always breaking out the camera at Christmas time and at birthdays and anniversaries. That was always when the camera came out. So when you look back over the family photo albums, it seemed like we were just getting presents all the time, or having barbecues, either getting presents or having barbecues. Like those were the only times my dad got out the camera. So it seemed like that's all we ever did for my entire lifetime, was give presents and get presents and have hamburgers on a barbecue, because that's the only thing he ever took pictures of. That's kind of funny, how your photo albums portray kind of a skewed version of reality from that time, as you only capture the highlight, the holidays. Something else that happened long before the actual December 25th holiday, Christmas Day, was the exchange of Christmas cards. And that is definitely a tradition that I think has fallen by the wayside. But back in the 60s and 70s, Christmas cards were not expensive. Cards didn't cost $10 each as they do today. When you buy a nice Hallmark card, you could buy big boxes of Christmas cards for not that much money. And I think a lot of organizations connected with churches and school groups would raise money by selling boxes of Christmas cards. And this would happen months before Christmas. So a school might be planning a school trip, and to raise money, they would sell big boxes of Christmas cards back in September and October. And the smart families, of course, would stock up on these in advance because they knew how many Christmas cards they would be sending out. And my family in particular was of Dutch heritage. My parents came to Canada as part of the very large Dutch migration that occurred after World War II. Large numbers of Europeans immigrated from all countries of Europe to Canada and the United States. And my hometown of Sarnia, Ontario, has a very large Dutch population, where some people from the Netherlands came to Canada and settled in that area as farmers or whatever their trade was. And then, of course, they would send back for other family members and they would join them. And the more Dutch people settled in that area, the more attractive it became for other people from the Netherlands to come to that city. And it grew into quite a sizable population. And these Dutch immigrants that came to Sarnia, for the most part, were members of the Dutch Christian Reformed Church. And when they gathered in Sarnia, they formed new churches there. And we had several quite large churches in Sarnia based on the Dutch Christian Reformed Church and the Dutch community in general. So it was a very tightly knit community of hundreds of people, perhaps hundreds of families that all knew each other and met every week for church services, and all the kids went to school together at a Christian school. And there were constant activities, social activities year-round based on the Dutch community and this series of Christian Reformed churches in Sarnia and in the nearby towns. So everyone who grew up in this Dutch community, they automatically knew quite well hundreds of other people in our hometown. It was a very large and tightly knit community. So they would sit down every year and send Christmas cards to all the other families, all the families that they were closest to. And this could amount to hundreds of Christmas cards. And we had the tradition in our family, as I think most of the Dutch community did, that we got so many Christmas cards, you couldn't just put them on display on the table. There wasn't enough room. So we would take string and run string all around the walls of the living room and the dining room and the kitchen, hanging this string from nail to nail, from, a photo, like a framed painting or something that has a nail holding it up. You just run strings between the paintings, from furniture to light fixtures. You just put strings everywhere. And every day as you approached Christmas, a big stack of Christmas cards would show up in the mailbox. And it was quite exciting to go get this big stack out of the mailbox, and you go through them, see who they're all from, and you open them one by one and read the message inside. There would often maybe be a photograph of the family inside, something like that, the family that the card was from. And then these cards would be strung on the strings. They're kind of bent, right? It's a piece of paper with a bend in it, and then you bend it over top of the string, and then you line dozens and even hundreds of cards all around the walls. And of course, every year you count how many you got, and you tried to remember so you could compare it to the next year. This year we got 98 Christmas cards, and then the next year, we got 120 Christmas cards, or whatever the number was. And of course, you couldn't do that anymore because cards are so expensive and postage is expensive. But back at that time, postage was reasonable, cards were not expensive, and it became quite a large tradition in my family to send and receive Christmas cards and then put them on display on all these strings around the house. That was a big part of Christmas in the weeks leading up to Christmas Day. Another tradition you always see in movies is when the family goes to get a Christmas tree. And in the movies, they go to the tree lot to buy an actual tree that has been cut down. And there's a whole bunch of them on display, and they all have different prices on them based on how big they are or how beautiful they are. and the whole family makes an evening of it to get in the car and drive to the Christmas tree lot, pick one out, and I guess if it's a big one, they have to tie it to the top of the car and rope it down and then drive it home and set the tree up. In my family, it was quite different. We never had a real tree. We had an artificial tree. And that tree was easily the center of all of our Christmas traditions, I think. And you might think, your instinct might be, an artificial tree? That's awful. You should get a real tree. They're so much better. But I disagree. I loved our artificial tree. We used the same tree year after year after year, and there were so many traditions built around that tree. I just have such fond memories of it. For one thing, the tree, when we bought it, or when my parents bought it, they bought it long before I even remember this happening. It came in a big box, and this box, between Christmases, was stored up in the attic of our house. And the attic was such a mysterious place because it was the one part of the house that wasn't insulated, up on the second floor, and there's these special square doors with little latches on it. And then as a kid, it was quite fun to open up that door and peek your head into the attic and look at all the mysterious boxes that were up there and all the spider webs. And you couldn't really go into our attic because it wasn't finished. It didn't have a floor, so you saw the exposed beams of the house. And if you happened to crawl out onto those beams, which we did do from time to time, and if your foot happened to slip through the beams, you're going right through the ceiling of whatever is below you. So you had to be very careful up in that attic. But that's where we stored the big items that we didn't need all the time. And that attic was also quite interesting, as I said, because it wasn't insulated. In the wintertime, it would be ice cold in there. And in the summertime, it would be brutally hot. And it developed its own unique aroma, the attic aroma. It smelled like no other place in the house. And as we approached Christmas, we kids, I had 2 brothers, so there were just 3 sons in the family. My mother always wanted a daughter, but she never did get one. She had 3 sons to deal with. And as Christmas approached, the 3 of us, the 3 boys, of course, were getting very excited about Christmas. And the big question is, when are we going to put up the tree? You don't want to put it up too early, I guess, because you get tired of it. But you don't want to put it up too late because you don't have time to enjoy it. And it relates to the gifts, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you had to get the timing of the putting up the Christmas tree just right. And my mother had built up a whole bunch of traditions around putting up the Christmas tree. Now I actually wonder where these traditions came from. Did she just do all these things because they were her idea as a young mother? And thinking back, it again is very surprising to think how young she was and how young parents were in general back in those days. My mother got married when she was 23. So in these early Christmases that I remember, she would have been in her mid to late 20s. I mean, really just a girl. She was really just a young girl, and yet she was in charge of this complete family, and all of these family traditions were on her shoulders, and she did so much work connected with them. It's only now, well, as I got older, that I truly appreciated everything she did. I mean, I enjoyed them very much as a child, but I think to a certain extent as a child, you do take things for granted. How can you not? And of course, as I got older, I appreciated what she did more and more. So we're pestering her about, when are we going to put up the tree? When are we going to put up the tree? And then she would finally announce. It would always be a weekend because the whole family got involved. And it would usually be a Saturday. Could have been a Sunday, but I think usually a Saturday afternoon. And the dad part of the putting up the tree was probably getting the box out of the attic. That was a man's job. You got to go into the dangerous attic, then pull out that big box and carry it down the stairs. So once my dad did that, his job was done. But my mother had been planning for that day the whole week, because putting up the Christmas tree involved special snacks. She always got the same special snacks every year that we wouldn't have at other times of the year. And she had a special tray. It was like a Lazy Susan kind of tray, a glass circular tray. And on the tray were individual glass containers, almost like shaped like pizza, slices of pizza, with a round bowl in the middle. And the way this worked was that all the different snacks, whether they were peanuts or chips or whatever they were, would be poured into all these individual pizza slice shaped pieces on the outer edge, and then in the middle would be a kind of dip. And this round Lazy Susan only came out at Christmas and New Year's. It was our holiday serving tray, and you never saw it at other times of the year that I remember. So that was always fun for us kids when this came out. And then during the week, my mother would be at the grocery store buying all the special snacks and stuffing them up into the cupboards. And then on Saturday afternoon, when it was finally time to put up the tree, out would come the tray, and then my mother would fill all the compartments in this Lazy Susan for snacks. Music, of course, was a big part of this, and my mother had special Christmas albums, usually like Christmas carols. As I said, they were members of the Dutch Christian Reformed Church, so all of our approaches to Christmas were religious in nature. There wasn't a lot of Santa Claus talk. I didn't grow up with the idea of Santa Claus. That wasn't part of my life or part of our culture. And so the songs that she would play would be Christmas carols, all the classics, Silent Night, Holy Night, and Hark the Herald Angels Sing, all the songs that and I'm sure a lot of people grew up with, as well as a few others. I remember her favorite was an album of The Little Drummer Boy. And I think that album, The Little Drummer Boy, was a Christmas present to her one year. And that's where that album came from. And it became a Christmas time favorite for all of us. So the snacks came out, the Christmas music was playing. So the stage was set for putting up the Christmas tree. And this was done with my mother being the general. She was giving the orders for this operation, and we three boys would be the soldiers who did the actual work. So it started with a base. There was a metal, kind of a pyramid-shaped structure, a heavy metal base to support the tree. That would go in place, and I think my father would have done that. And there was a piece of wood we had my entire life that would go underneath this so it didn't damage the floor, where the main pole hits the ground, and you can raise it and lower it depending on what you like. So the first stage was to take the trunk of the tree. It was almost like broom poles that you would screw together. So all of these would have to go in one by one, and my mother would pull them out of the box and hand them to us boys one by one, and we would each have the honor of putting one of these poles into place and then screwing on the next one and then the next one until we had the full height of the pole. And then the actual branches of the tree were pieces of wire, twisted braided wire with plastic pine needles all over them. And they were color-coded based on how you put them in the tree. So these posts that we put into the anchor point all had holes drilled into them on an angle, and these wire branches would stick into that hole, and because the holes were angled, the branches would stick out at just the right angle. But all these holes in the tree had different colors, and all of our branches on the very tip of the wire had a color that matched the holes. So my mother would pull all of these out of the box of the Christmas tree, and then we would all have to sort through them, and then we put them into piles based on color. So we'd have to organize them. All the blue tips go in this pile, then the yellow tips go here, and the green tips go here. So we had them all organized, ready to go in. But before we could even start that, we had to put the rings on. There were these round, like bits of wire that had been shaped in a ring with pine needles on them as well, and their job was to cover up the pole in the middle. So if you look between the branches, you don't just see a broomstick, you see more green tree. So the first thing you have to do is take all of these round things, like almost like hockey pucks, and then you put them on the top of the pole and then drop them down, and you have to stack them all up at the bottom all at once. And I think as kids that was fun to do, and all of us boys got to take a certain number of those rings and then put them on the pole and watch them drop down to the bottom, and then we stack them all up. And then what you do is, as you put the branches in place, you raise some of those rings up. So you put in all the blue branches, and then you raise up 2 or 3 rings, hold them in place, and then you put in all the yellow branches, raise more rings, put in the green tip branches, and you slowly work your way all the way from the top of the tree down to the bottom. And then, so my brothers and I were like worker ants. We were like going back and forth between my mother and the tree. So I'd walk to my mother, she would hand me one of the yellow tipped branches, and I march off with it like a flag, go to the tree, look for the yellow hole, stick it in, and then walk back, passing my brothers, and then I go get another yellow one from my mother, and we go back and forth, like these worker ants, and my mother would organize this and give us the branches in order, going from top down to bottom, because that's how you had to put the tree together. If you went the other way, you got all mixed up, and then you wouldn't be able to raise the rings up. So you had to start at the top and go down to the bottom. And at the very, very top, there was one special branch, and this one had no brothers or sister branches to go with it. It was unique, and it was just a single branch that pointed straight up from the top of the tree. And of course, you needed that branch because the very top of the tree was where you put the prime ornament, the star or the angel. I think for most of my life, it was a star. And it was a specially designed ornament that had kind of a round spring on the bottom that fit over top of the tip of that top branch, and the star would go up there. And the honor of putting the star up there, I think, would normally go to my older brother because he was tall. He could reach that high. He was today I guess he's 6'3", 6'4". He's quite a bit taller than I am. And then he could reach the top and put the star there. Or I guess my father would have done it. But yeah, that was a big part of everything, putting that top branch in a single hole in the top, and then slowly building the tree, raising the rings until you get all the way down to the bottom. And yeah, it was just so much fun for a kid, especially. It was like putting together a puzzle, all the pieces that you put together. And again, in the Hollywood movies, driving to the car lot or the tree lot and picking out a tree, I can see that being a very fun family tradition. And having a natural tree, I guess, is nice. But for me, that artificial tree was like the greatest thing ever, because we knew it so well. It was almost like a part of the family, and it came out every year. We pull it out of the attic, and you get that attic smell, and you open the box, and it's ice cold because it was sitting in the attic, and everything is fresh and crisp, and you get that smell inside the box, which is unlike any other smell. And the branches would still have tinsel on it, like silver and gold tinsel from the year before that didn't get pulled off the tree. So it had memories of earlier Christmases, little bits and pieces. Some of it like had little bits of snow and maybe bits of ornament that got left behind that didn't get removed from the tree. So it was just a very pleasant thing to put up the Christmas tree every year. Of course, assembling the tree was just the beginning of the Christmas tree process, because once the tree was assembled, then we had to decorate it. So, of course, that led to more Christmas lights adventures, because my dad had put up all the outdoor lights, the ones that were designed to be outside and could handle snow and extreme temperatures. But we also had the Christmas tree lights, which were indoor lights, and they had to come out of the box and be all the knots has to be untangled. And then I think this was kind of an adult job, but we kids would help out, and you would carefully string the lights in the Christmas tree as well. And then came the ornaments. And the ornaments were as big a part of Christmas as everything else, because we used the same ornaments year after year after year, and we knew them really well. So my mother, again, would be the general in charge of this, and she would have this big box of all the Christmas ornaments that we had accumulated over the years. And then we boys, the worker ants, would form a line again, come up to her at the box, and then she would select an ornament out of the box with a little loop on the end, kind of like a fish hook, a little hook, and she would hand it to us by the hook, and then we would grab the little wire and then trot off to the tree and then try to find the perfect place to hang that ornament. And I knew the ornaments quite well, so I would look with anticipation to see which ornament my mother was going to give me. And some of them were better than others for me. It's like, oh, I hope I get that ornament, and I want that one. And when the more beautiful, ornate ones came out, the ones, the round ornaments made out of thin material with beautiful decorations, the delicate ones, of course, you had to be very careful not to drop them, because, of course, shattering a Christmas tree ornament is another Christmas tradition for every family. You always end up breaking one of them. And if you don't break it, the house cat will, because cats find Christmas trees irresistible, and they're always up in the tree and batting at the ornaments. And of course, every Christmas, one or two of them get knocked out of the tree and get broken. So each year you do buy new ornaments, but quite a number of them continue over the years. I remember we had gold and silver bells, like large, about this big, large plastic bells, brightly painted gold and silver. Had a whole collection of those that we would hang up. We had elves. I remember these elves, kind of an odd thing maybe for my family to have elves, because that wasn't, as I said, part of our Christmas traditions in general. We didn't have a whole lot of Santa Claus related things. But we did have these elves that had their knees pulled up with their arms wrapped around their knees in this bright red and white outfits. I remember a few of those, and we'd hang them on the tree. And we had homemade ornaments, because several Christmases, my mother would also organize things for us kids to sit down in the days leading up to putting up the tree to make our own ornaments. Or after the tree was already put up, then on a following weekend, she'd organize this event where we would make ornaments. And we made things like popcorn strings. You make popcorn, and then you run a needle with thread through the popcorn, and you make like a decorative string of popcorn. I remember we made special ornaments out of styrofoam balls, these white circular balls that you could buy in hobby shops, and then we decorate them with sparklies and whatever else my mother had picked up that year. And of course they were never very beautiful because they were made by kids, but after we made them, they became part of our Christmas tradition, and they went into the box at the end of Christmas. And the next year, I open the box and my mother pulls out that ball that I made the previous year, and so I got to put it back on the tree. And So we would slowly work through the entire box of ornaments, and we kids would, hang them up all over the tree. And we would sometimes have new tinsel. That was always a big deal. Anything new in my family was a big deal because we did tend to reuse everything. And buying a new Christmas decoration was an event. And I guess my mother would always buy new boxes of tinsel, that very thin silver and gold, stretchy, sparkly stuff. I don't quite know what to call it, but it comes in these long, thin boxes. And then as kids, it was such great fun to pull them out of that box. And then you go to the tree and drape them over the tree. And when all of that was done, the tree was assembled, the lights were on, all the ornaments and the decoration and the tinsel was on. Then, of course, came the big moment. This took a long time. My family tended to draw things out. Our traditions got quite long, we wanted to stretch things out. And we would even take breaks, I think, between the stages of decorating the Christmas tree so we could all rush to the dining room where that tray of snacks was waiting for us. And then we'd all have some snacks, and then we'd go back to decorating the tree. And it would go on for a long time, so it might even be getting into dark evening by the time we were done. And then, of course, came the big moment, and we plug in the lights, and the lights come on. And it's like, ooh, big moment. There's our Christmas tree for this year. And it would always be put up in front of the window in the living room. It's a big part of Christmas in Canada, so that as you go walking around the neighborhood at Christmas time, every household would have their beautiful Christmas tree dead center in the living room window. And they would leave the curtains open at night so that people could see their tree with all the lights. And that was another really nice part of Christmas. And I remember decorations were not restricted to the tree, the Christmas tree itself. We also had these stencils that we got out of books. And we would take these stencils of perhaps an angel or a star, the Christmas star, the Bethlehem star, and Christmas trees and snowmen, anything to do with winter or the Christmas season. And then we had cans of artificial snow. So you take these stencils, paper stencils with a cutout of an angel or something in the paper, hold it against the window on the inside of the house, and then you take the can of snow and spray it, just like you're spray painting something. And then when you pull the paper away, you have the perfect outline of a snowman or a Christmas tree or whatever the stencil was. So we would go all around the dining room and the living room and then use these stencils to decorate the windows with that as well. We had stockings. I don't think we had stockings at the very beginning of our life as a family, but I think in later years my mother got us all a stocking. So we had stockings nailed up or hung up by the fireplace. We didn't have a real fireplace by this point. We had a fake one, a plastic fireplace with lights inside that simulated a burning fire. A log fire. It was just a light bulb that turned around. So that was our fireplace. But we had stockings with our names on them. And then my mother would put little presents inside each stocking. And I think that was a tradition that developed later on. I don't think that was at the very beginning. Which reminds me, we also had candy canes. And candy canes came in these big boxes that looked the same every year. You could buy them from grocery stores. And if they were small ones, you would have these cardboard boxes filled with dozens of tiny candy canes, just all lined up in this box on display. And my mother would buy these, and then we would take these candy canes and then hang them as ornaments on the tree as well. And then there would be a small selection of bigger ones. She might buy 4 or 5 or 6 of those, not very many. And then we kids would be allowed to take one of these big candy canes. Whoa! 2 coconuts just fell. Actually, now that I think about it, I have a roof ahead. Well, I don't think it would hold up much in the way of coconuts, but I should look up there. Are there coconuts above me? No. Luckily, the chair is not underneath the palm tree. It's over there. But yeah, you wouldn't want to get hit on the head. How ironic would it be that here I am talking about family traditions, family Christmas traditions from Canada in the 60s and 70s, and I get whacked on the head by a coconut in Thailand. That would be pretty funny. Anyway, I did not get hit by the coconut. I was just saying it was a big deal to take these big candy canes and hang them on the Christmas tree. And you really had to be careful how you hung those because they were so delicate. And if they did fall, it was so sad to have one of those big candy canes break into pieces. And in the weeks leading up to Christmas Day, we would occasionally get permission from our mother to have one of those candy canes. You know, it was such a huge treat. It's like, you know, Mom, can we have a candy cane? Can we have a candy cane? And she would, oh, okay. And then we would all run to the tree and we could all take one of those little candy canes, and that would be our treat for that day. And that was always a big part of Christmas traditions as well, the candy canes. I'd almost forgotten about that. Other decorations only came out at Christmas time. My mother and a lot of Dutch households, they all had the same Christmas decorations that they stored in between Christmas. They only came out for Christmas. A lot of them involved candles. There might be a green or flowered wreath with candles in the middle. And I remember my mother developed a tradition of building a Christmas village. I'm not quite sure where she picked that up, and I think other people in the Dutch community did it as well, where she had a large display, a piece of wood, and on this piece of wood you can build a little village, almost like men would build a train set. My mother would build a beautiful, perfect miniature village, decorated and set for wintertime, you know, Christmas at wintertime. And then every year she would add to it with a new building or new people or new objects. And little hobbies like that were always great for Christmas too, because if you had trouble deciding what to get someone for Christmas, it helped a lot if they had a hobby. So someone who liked to develop their Christmas village, you could always buy them a new building, a little shop or a cute little house or a shoe repair shop or something to add to their Christmas village. So you're always thankful when a person had a hobby, right? It always makes birthdays and Christmas easier because you know exactly what to get them if you have no other ideas. And certain games tended to only come out at Christmas time as well. So there were Christmas games that would even be combined with the day of putting up the Christmas tree. One of my favorites all time has always been Yahtzee. I just love Yahtzee, and I could play Yahtzee all the time. I always wish I could run into people as I travel around and have a Yahtzee game in my knapsack, and we could all play Yahtzee together. There's something about the simplicity of that game and the excitement of it, and then rolling so many dice in the cup, you know, and winning a Yahtzee. And yeah, it was just a fun little game, and we would play that as a family, and I always enjoyed that. Again, it was my mother who was behind organizing these games and encouraging us to sit down and play as a family. And I think as kids, your initial reaction might be, I don't want to play games. And yet when you did, it was always such a great experience. Thinking back now, I wish we had done a lot more family games like that, because I enjoyed them so much. You might be reluctant at first to do it, but once you get into it, kind of like the old idea of like turning off the TV and just sitting down as a family and playing a spirited game of Yahtzee is just great. I mean, it's just such a wonderful experience. And the Dutch community had a game called Schuebak, which was a huge Christmas time favorite. Schuebak is like shuffleboard. It's a homemade, long, thin board with slots at the end, numbered slots, and you take these wooden pucks, slide these wooden pucks down the board, and try to get them into these slots. And the key to this game was not getting all of your pucks into one slot. You had to distribute them evenly, because there would be 4 slots at the end, numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you might think you want to get all of your pucks into number 4 because you get the most points. You get 4 points. But if you get 1 puck in each, 1, 2, 3, and 4 evenly, then you get 20 points, I believe. So that was how you won the game. You had to build up your pucks evenly in each compartment at the end by getting them through the slots. And Dutch people are fiercely, fiercely competitive when it comes to schuebak, winning and playing well, and competitive over who has the best schuebak, because any homemade board differs greatly in terms of how it works, the style of it, how wide the slots are, how bouncy the wood is, how long it is. All these things affect the gameplay. And anyone who's playing on their home schuebak board had a big advantage because you knew how your board worked and you were much more skilled at the game, you know. If you went to a friend's house and they had their schuebak and you played them on their schuebak, they would always win because they knew how their board worked. But schuebak is a huge Dutch tradition as well for Christmas, and that was always something to look forward to. Family games, and Chinese checkers was a big favorite in my family. Yeah, also came out at Christmas time. That was when my mother always got it into her head that we should sit down as a family and play games. And it was always nice when she forced us to do that. And then we always ended up enjoying it quite a bit, or at least I did. And that brings me to the topic that started this fireside chat in my mind, and that is buying and giving presents. As I said, in my family, the buying of presents started months and months before Christmas for my mother, as she would buy them and then squirrel them away and hide them from us during the year. And even for us kids and my dad and for everyone, we would also start thinking about Christmas presents weeks, maybe even months before Christmas. And the tradition in my family was that we each bought one present for every other person in the family. So I bought a present for my brother, my older brother. I bought a present for my younger brother. I bought a present for my dad. I bought a present for my mom. And our grandmother lived with us at that time. It was my mother's mother. And I would buy a present for her. So I would buy 5 presents, one for each member of my family. My brother, he would buy 5 presents, one for each member of our family, and so on. So everyone would get one present from every other person in the family. And then, of course, my mother would buy many more presents for us as kids. And of course, considering this era, how practical people were and that we weren't exactly drowning in money at the time, you know, very few people were. It's not like today where people just seem to have more money to buy more things, and things seem to be cheaper now. Back in those days, it was a bit more of a frugal period, I think. So, of course, my mother would buy presents, but these were things that we actually needed. So, you know, if we needed new socks, new underwear, new shirts, a new bathrobe, all these things that we needed for school, all these items that she would have had to have bought for us anyway, she would save all those up for Christmas, and then they would be Christmas presents for us. And as kids, we didn't mind, you know, we didn't know anything like this was going on. They were presents, and we were delighted to get them, you know, no matter what they were. And my parents would generally buy one big present for each of us. So we would have a whole bunch of small presents, little things that we got from other members of the family, and that from my mother who bought them, and you know, school school items and clothing and stuff like that. Those were all presents under the tree. But each of us got one big present each year, and that was considered our main present. It might be a bicycle. It might be, I remember my brother got a hockey net one Christmas, and more about that in a minute. And yeah, if I thought about it, I could think of all the big presents that we got over the years. And again, it was a different era. Today, a big present might be $1,000 camera or something, or an Xbox, or some like really big, expensive luxury item. But back in those days, a clock radio from Radio Shack, that was a big ticket item. That was a big present to get. And I remember, I think it was my younger brother got, a nice clock radio for Christmas one time. And that was his big present that year. So yeah, it was a different era. But I remember that the gift giving and gift getting was almost 90% about anticipation and planning, because weeks in advance you already started thinking about what you're going to get someone for Christmas. And again, back in those days, we had catalogs. So there was a special shelf in our living room that had all the catalogs. So we had a big, thick, like literally 500-600 page catalog from Sears, and another catalog from another department store, and another department store, and a very special store called Consumers Distributing, which I don't think it exists anymore, but it was a big deal back in those days. And you'd walk into the living room in my house and discover somebody, one of my brothers or my mother or my father, sitting in a chair surrounded by catalogs, and he's got a catalog open, and you walk in the room and they'd snap it closed. Hey, no peeking, because what they're doing is going through the catalogs, trying to find a present for someone. And then, of course, all these jokes would come out of that situation. You see someone looking at the catalog, and you're like, "Oh, are you looking for a present for me? What are you looking at? What are you looking at? Let me see. And they're like, no, it's not for you. I'm getting a present for your mother. Not for you. Don't. No. Oh, I know it's for me. Let me see. And you fight over the catalog, and I would wait until nobody was around, and then get out the catalogs and just sort of flip through the pages and think about the things I could get for my brothers or my mother or my father. And it was just so much fun to do, the planning and the thinking and the budgeting, because we didn't have a lot of money. I certainly didn't as a kid. You had to be very careful with the money you spent, and you're, totaling up how much everything is going to cost and what you can buy different people. And this store I mentioned, Consumers Distributing, was so much fun because they had a special ordering system in the store. It wasn't a regular department store. They had all of their items in the basement, and then you just went up to a counter on the main floor, and then they would get the item from the basement and put it on a conveyor belt, and then it would come up from the basement on a conveyor belt. And when you went into Consumers Distributing, they had all these desks with the catalogs on the desk, and then you have a little order form with a pencil, those special little yellow pencils that are all about this long. And you go through the catalog, find the item you want, get the product number, and then you have to fill out the form, write down the product number and how many of that item you want, one, and then you write down the product number for some board game that you're buying for your brother or something. And then you take that piece of paper, once it's filled out, hand it in at the counter. They pass it on, it goes down into the basement, and after a couple of minutes, that item would come rolling up on the conveyor belt, and then you could pick it up and pay for it. So even going to Consumers Distributing and shopping for presents was like a game show. It was so much fun. And once you buy the present, of course, you've got to sneak it home. How do you get it back to the house without anyone seeing? You don't want anyone knowing what the present is in advance. That is an ironclad rule. You do not know. And this tradition I've seen in other families and in movies too, where people have a list. These are the things I want. They make a list. I think my father got interested in that in later years, but I always hated that, because for me, the present should be a surprise. You shouldn't know what it is, and don't tell me what you want. That just takes all the fun out of it. If you just tell me what you want and I go buy it for you, you might as well just go buy it yourself. That's no fun at all. Part of the fun is trying to decide what will make that person happy. What do they want? Maybe it's something they don't even know they want. And if you get that just right, it can bring so much joy to another person, like my vanilla Coke that I just got. And so you sneak the present back to the house, and then you have to wrap it. And wrapping presents was a very big deal at my house as well. My mother was in charge of buying the wrapping paper. And as I mentioned in a previous video, when we opened presents, we would save the wrapping paper every year. One person was always assigned the job of the garbage man. I think we even called that person the garbage man. I love to do that, where after someone opened a present, they would give you the wrapping paper, and then you would carefully fold it up and put it in the box to save it for next year so you could use it again. So we would get out the box of all the wrapping paper that was saved from the previous year, and we took some pride. We were not crafts people in my family. I knew of some families that were very focused on the beauty of the wrapping and doing it with special ribbons that they curl into nice shapes, and they use brand new wrapping paper every year. My family was much more utilitarian than that, since we used old wrapping paper. And when we put a label on the present, it wasn't like a special card that we purchased and put in an envelope. We cut a square out of that wrapping paper and then fold it into a little envelope and write down on that square, to Rick, one of my brothers, from Doug. And then we take that square and use Scotch tape and tape it to the box and then fold it over. So that was how we labeled our presents as well. A very utilitarian, simple, but also kind of a fun way to do it. But we would try to wrap as neatly as possible. I took some pride in getting really nice, neat corners on all the boxes. But we also had the tradition in my family of disguising the present. As I said, you had to keep the present a secret. And it was a pretty big deal that when the presents would go under the Christmas tree, a new present would emerge. Somebody would sneak into the living room and put a present under the tree and sneak out again, waiting for someone to discover it. Or you might walk into the living room and, wow, there's 5 new presents under the tree. And then you kind of run towards the tree and look at them and see who it's for and who it's from. And then you pick up the box and kind of, oh, how heavy is it? What is it? And you kind of give it a little shake, turn it upside down, and you try to guess what is in that present. I always thought that was such a fun game. I remember my father didn't like that for some reason. It just bugged him that we were picking up the presents and trying to guess what they were. For whatever reason, this rubbed him the wrong way. He didn't like that particular tradition. But I thought it was quite harmless and a lot of fun. It was part of the fun of Christmas, trying to guess what was in the box, what someone gave you for Christmas. And what we would do is try to trick the other person. So, for example, when my brother got the hockey net, it came in a big box because it's a big item. But instead of wrapping up a hockey net and putting it under the tree, for one thing, that's logistically difficult, but then you could also guess what it is. So what my parents would do is hide the hockey net in the garage or in some other room, and then they would write down a little note of where to find the present, just on a tiny piece of paper, and they would put that into the tiniest little box they could find and just hide it under the tree. So, of course, Rick would be looking for whatever presents were addressed to him, and then he finds this tiny, tiny little box. It's like, what? Like, what is in there? And there's also a little bit of disappointment because you want big presents as a kid. And it's like, this little present, that's all I'm getting for Christmas? Like, what's in there? And of course, Christmas Eve, when he opens it, it's a note that says, go to the garage, you will find your present. Or it could be a little bit of a scavenger hunt. Go to the kitchen in the sugar bowl. He opens the sugar bowl, another note go to the living room in the jewelry box, and there's another note leading him on a wild chase until he finally gets to the garage, where I get to the garage where I find a bicycle or a hockey net or some other big item. That was our big present for the year. We'd also disguise presents by making them heavier. So if something was really lightweight and that would give away what the present is, we would take a rock or a whole bunch of pennies, a heavy piece of metal, and put it in the box with it and make it heavier to disguise it. Or if you put in loose items, like loose pennies, and then the person shakes the box and they hear all these things rattling around, it's like, what in the world? What could that be? So you would also disguise the present if you can, to trick the other person so they can't guess what the present is. And all of this was happening over weeks and weeks before Christmas. As I said, it was such a huge holiday for me growing up, and I think for most Canadians. It wasn't like you see in the movies, where, again, I dislike this so much, where it's all about Christmas morning, December 25th, Christmas morning, all the kids run at the tree all at once and then just tear open all these gifts, and that's Christmas. But I guess that's kind of why I'm doing this fireside chat as well. Maybe people around the world don't even know that Christmas has much more meaning for people in Canada and the United States than they show in the movies. There's so much more to the holiday and to the celebrations than you might think if you just watch a typical Hollywood movie. We did things quite a bit differently in my family. For one thing, we opened all of our presents on Christmas Eve, not on Christmas Day. As I said, when I was growing up, my family was a traditional Christian family, and Christmas Day was all about going to church. The more traditional birth of Jesus, Bethlehem story, that was what Christmas was really about for them. And all of the gift giving, the more secular traditions surrounding Christmas all happened before Christmas Day, kind of leading up to Christmas Eve, when we exchanged gifts. And then the next day was all about the more traditional religious side of Christmas. So Christmas Eve was the big event for me as a kid, for all of us, in my family when we were growing up. And we had a whole ritual designed around the evening, which I'll tell you about. We would look forward to it, of course, all day long, and we couldn't wait to get started. And it would always start with the kids, me and my two brothers, taking a bath before opening the gifts. But of course, when you take a bath and then you come out of the bathtub, you've got to put on your pajamas. And every year for Christmas, our very first present was always new pajamas. So my mother would signal that the evening had begun by saying, okay, it's time to open your first present. And we would all sit down around the tree in a circle. And this was another big part of how my family did Christmas. We always opened presents, one present at a time. So each person would be handed a present by my mother. She acted, I think she even called herself Santa Claus in later years. I don't think at the beginning, but later on she performed the role of Santa Claus. And she was like the master of ceremonies. And she would select each present in turn to give it to the person. Well, it would actually be, if it was like from me to my brother, she would select it from under the tree, give it to me, and then I would hand it to my brother because it was from Doug to Rick. So because I'm giving it to him, I would physically hand it to him, and then my brother would open that present while all of us watched. And of course, he opened it carefully, and then I was the garbage man, and I'd fold up the paper and put it in the box for next year. And then my brother would open the gift, react to it in however he was, show it to everyone. We'd all ooh and ah over that present and get a lot of pleasure out of it. And then we would move on to the next present. And then my mother would say, okay, it's Doug's turn. And then who wants to give Doug your present? And my dad might say, oh, from me, give him my present. And then we'd pick out the present from the pile that my father picked out for me. And then he would hand it to me. And then I would open that present while everyone watched and waited for me to finish. And we'd all ooh and ah over the present my dad gave me. And we'd look at it and talk about it and enjoy it together. And then I would set it aside. And then the attention goes back to my mother and says, okay, now it's Rod's turn, my younger brother. And then there'd be some discussion over which present was appropriate for him, and we decide on which one. And of course, we're building from smallest to biggest. So all the little presents were handed out first, and we're building to the one big present that everyone in the family got that year. And my mother, of course, as master of ceremonies and the organizer of all the family traditions, she knew what most of the big presents were. So she had a good idea of what most of the presents under the tree were, and then we would work through them carefully. And if she didn't know, like for example, I would not tell her what I bought other people. And she would count on advice from other people about which present was appropriate at which time. And then we would go all the way around the family members, and then it would come back to my mother, and it would be her turn to open a present. But of course, as mistress of ceremonies, she couldn't decide, and she would sit back and kind of fold her hands and smile and kind of look happy and excited and say, okay, it's my turn. And then we would discuss, okay, let's give her my present. Or my brother would say, no, let's give her my present. And then we would hand my mother a present, and she would open it. We'd all ooh and ah over that present. And she would set it aside. And then we'd go around again in a circle. One by one, everybody would open one present, with my mother sitting right underneath the tree, like right beside the tree, and the rest of us sitting in a circle on the floor. My dad, of course, sitting in the dad chair. He's always sitting in the lazy boy. That's where dads sit. And my grandmother was with us for many of those years, and she had her own chair, and she would be sitting there, and she was included in the circle of presents going around. Though I think for us kids, she was always the toughest person to buy a present for, because she was much, of course, older, and she didn't speak English, my grandmother. She was born in the Netherlands and came to Canada when she was already older and never did really learn English. So we didn't know her that well, even though she was our grandmother and was living in the house with us. So it was kind of hard to buy her presents, but she was part of the family just as much as everyone, and she was included in the gift opening sequence. But the very first gift, as I said, I ordered a second cafe latte. So good. I'm buying myself presents. I'm buying myself cafe lattes on Christmas Day. But the very first present, as I said, was always new pajamas. So we'd sit down around the tree, and my mother would give us our package. And of course, we knew what they were, what was in them, but we'd pretend we didn't. It's like, oh, what could it be? What could it be? And we'd open it. New pajamas. And then all three boys, we would troop off to the bathroom, and we had a bathtub at that time. And we all took a bath together, which seems so bizarre to me now to think about it, but that's what we did when we were kids. And we all took a bath and climbed out of the bath, and we put on our brand new clean pajamas, and now it was the time to open the rest of the presents. And the next present was always another tradition. Every Christmas, I'm not entirely sure why, I don't know if this is a Dutch tradition, to be honest, we would get a gingerbread man, a big, thick gingerbread man. And that was our present number 2. So each of the boys, one in turn, we would get to open this big thing, and we generally knew what it was, and that was our gingerbread man. And we were allowed to open it completely and take a bite out of it. We wouldn't eat the whole, it was so huge, you couldn't anyway. This thing would last for days, if not weeks. It was so big. And then we just sort of nibble on it, gingerbread man, and then put it aside. That was present number 2. And then present number 3, and I'm sure this is a Dutch tradition, though I don't know where it came from, is we all got a chocolate letter. So I would get a small little box, and inside it would be a big chocolate letter D for Doug. And my dad would get a letter H for Hank. And my mother would get a letter T for Treintje or Tina. And my brothers would get letter R's for Rick and Rod. So every Christmas we would all get a chocolate letter. And these would come from a special store in my hometown, the Dutch shop, which was filled with all the Dutch delicacies that Dutch people like. And they sold these chocolate letters. And they could be regular chocolate, which I preferred at that time, or dark chocolate. And my mother would know who liked what and would try to get us what we liked if it was available, because these were hot items. You had to get in there quick to get your chocolate letters before they run out. And that would be present number 3, that each of us would get a chocolate letter. And I love those chocolate letters. And I would always open up my D. And the way the D was written, it was kind of a fancy D with a little bit of a chunk sticking out of the top and bottom. And I would ration my chocolate, but whenever I opened it up, I would always take a bite of one of those little chunks that sticks out. That would be my first bite. And then I would put it back in its container and set it aside. I'd have that little piece of chocolate just to taste it before we continued with opening gifts. So those were kind of the opening salvo of the gift giving, the new pajamas, the gingerbread man, the chocolate letters, and then we would move into the other gifts. And as I said, my mother would keep things nice and controlled and organized, and we would slowly pick through all the gifts under the tree until the pile got smaller and smaller, until we finally reached the final stage where each of us got our one big present that kind of came from the rest of the family. Funny thing is, I remember my mother quite often saying in later years that she was losing control of the process because, of course, when we were younger as kids and she was a young mother, she knew everything. She, had laser focus on every single present and knew exactly how to organize things and give everything to everyone in the proper order. But later years, of course, as we were acting more independently, she had less knowledge about what the presents were. And I remember her saying quite often, it's like, I don't know what's going on anymore. I used to know everything and now I don't know anymore. And she needs more help from us in terms of deciding which gift to give at which time as we go through the gift giving on Christmas Eve. And of course, throughout this process, my father was hanging back a little bit. It was more about the kids when we were young and my mother being in control of the presents. But he had his camera in his lap, and every time we opened up a nice present, something that was really nice, he would tell us to pose, hold it, and he'd take our picture. And we have a bunch of photographs like that of us kids, surrounded by the presents that we got that year for Christmas. And there were other things that always happened at Christmas time. I don't know if you'd call them exactly Christmas traditions, but in my mind they are. For example, there was a family in the Dutch community that had a large property out in the countryside. They were farmers, and they had 2 big ponds there. And the father in this family was very handy, and every year he would develop one of the ponds as an ice skating rink, complete with lights, music, a changing shack with a wood fire inside where you could go in to warm up your hands and warm up and change into your ice skates. And they would have a huge tub of hot chocolate over an open fire, if I remember right. I think it was an open fire. And I don't know how many years this happened, but it feels like it happened for years and years and years, because I remember these evenings so clearly when this family would have their ice skating Christmas or wintertime party. And everyone in the Dutch community, everyone from all these Dutch Christian Reformed churches, anyone in the Dutch community was invited out to their property at night. at an appropriate time when it was cold enough and the ice was thick enough, and he had a special tractor that he made with a plow to, you know, get the snow off the ice and get it smooth and perfect for skating. And we would go out there for an ice skating party every winter. And in my mind, that is part of the whole, you know, Christmas celebrations as well. And those were amazing evenings that I remember so well. They were so cold. People always tell me, you know, how cold Canada is. People that are from other countries to say, "Oh, you're from Canada. Oh, so cold," right? And I have to explain, well, no, it's not cold. In the summer, it's hot. In the fall, it's perfect. In the spring, it's cool. I have to explain about the 4 seasons. It's not cold all the time. But that night of ice skating on the pond in the dark, that was cold. Your feet were blocks of ice. Your hands were cold. That was a cold, cold night. And there was nothing like getting a cup of fresh hot chocolate from that big canister over the open fire. Take some hot chocolate and going into the changing room where you can put on your skates and take them off. And so many little moments from those times where you would go into that room and sit on a bench with the fire, and you take your skates off and your feet are frozen solid. And as they start to warm up, they tingle. It's so painful. When your feet are frozen, it doesn't hurt. But it's when they warm up and the blood starts to flow again, they really start to tingle, and the pain can be pretty extreme. So of course, you know, your father would come in and take your foot in his lap, or my grandmother would, or someone else would in the community, and they take your feet in their lap and they rub your feet and rub them and try to make them warm up quicker and feel better. Yeah, I remember moments like that. And there was also tobogganing. They were also community events in the Dutch community. We did them as families too. We had a park in my hometown, Centennial Park, that had kind of a low hill. But of course, to kids, anything is big. So to me, it was a big hill at the time. And we would go there as a family from time to time. I don't know how many times we did it, but I have clear memories of it. And we have pictures of going there as a family, and then we would toboggan down the hill. And then there were bigger events organized by the Dutch community, where a lot of people would go to the same place. There was a campground owned by this community, Lakewood, and they had a really nice tobogganing hill, and we would all go there together and go tobogganing in the wintertime, go sledding down the hill. And I remember being very proud of myself because I thought I invented sliding down on my boots, because I didn't like to go down on a toboggan. And I got these special boots that were like completely smooth on the bottom, and then I would kind of sand them too to make them as smooth as possible. So I could actually just stand on my feet, stand upright, and then go sliding down the hill on my own boots. And we even experimented with doing that with skateboards. When I was into skateboarding, in the wintertime, we took the wheels off the skateboard, and then we glued sandpaper on the skateboard itself to give a spot for our feet to grip them. And then we would try to ride our skateboard down the slopes on the snow. And to this day, I claim that because of this, I invented snowboarding, because back in the 70s, we were snowboarding down the hill on skateboards, or maybe it was the early 80s. I don't remember when we did this, but yeah, we were playing around with primitive snowboards way back then. We made them ourselves out of skateboards. They didn't work, so I can't claim to have invented snowboarding, because we just went a few feet and fell over because, you know, it didn't have the proper edges or the proper shape, and you didn't have binding or anything like that. So it was nothing like a Burton snowboard that eventually broke into the market and became a huge success. But yeah, we were kind of snowboarding back then as well. And that was another big Christmas tradition. The ice skating parties, and then the tobogganing parties, and hockey tournaments. The Christian churches in the Dutch community from all the from all of Ontario, from my province, they all had hockey teams as well. And around Christmas time, they would have a tournament where all the churches would send their hockey team to the same place, and they would compete in a hockey tournament. And I remember those pretty clearly because I loved hanging out in the hockey arenas, watching game after game after game as the tournament progressed. And it always seemed to be that a massive snowstorm would hit the region every single time we had a hockey tournament, without fail. You're going to the hockey tournament either on your way there or on the way home. You're in the car with your parents, like driving through a blizzard, barely able to see the highway in front of you, with cars in the ditch all over the place. It was like every single hockey tournament where we had to drive to another city, that was when a blizzard, a huge snowstorm would hit. Every year. It just seemed to happen all the time. It was strange. That's my memory of it anyway. And I think a lot of that just doesn't happen anymore. I mean, even my father, he built ice rinks in the backyard for us kids. Like when we were kids, learning to skate, learning to play hockey, a big Canadian thing, of course. I played in hockey leagues my whole youth. And it was, my father who taught me how to skate, basically, because he would go in the backyard in the winter, again, around Christmas time, and he would use a garden hose, sprinkle water, and we would all step on the snow with our boots and flatten it out. And then night after night after night, he'd be out there with the hose, putting water and making a perfectly flat, ice skating surface for us. And then we went out there as young boys learning how to skate. And we would bring the kitchen chair out with us because, we couldn't stand up yet on skates. So we would bring a chair to the backyard on this ice skating rink, put on our skates, and then we'd hold on to the chair and then try and move around my dad's homemade ice rink. And that's how we learned how to skate. But these days, I don't know how much that happens because winter has changed. As far as I can tell, I haven't lived in Canada for a long time, but I don't think winters are the same anymore. You're almost lucky to get a white Christmas now. The true snow and cold doesn't hit until much later, and I don't think you can count on as much solid stretches of ice cold weather and snow as we used to. So I think winter has shortened considerably, and the temperatures have gone up quite a bit. You just don't seem to get as much snow and ice and cold temperatures as in my youth. So I think making ice rinks in the backyard, skating on ponds. Speaking of skating on ponds, this is another big thing for me. There was one family, or several families in the Dutch community that owned a gravel company, K&E Gravel. And they owned this huge property where they dug pits to get the gravel. And these pits would fill with water. So there was a series of big ponds there, and they would freeze over in the winter as well. And when I was older and a little bit more independent, we could drive different places with my friends, or we would go there with my family. I don't really remember that. We would go to these ponds in the wintertime to go ice skating, and we would bring our own snow shovels because we had to shovel the snow off the ice first. And the thing you could do, which was so cool, was like it's quite a large pond, much, much, much bigger than the pond here at the coffee shop. We would go out there on our skates and take our snow shovel ahead of us like a snow plow, and then go skating in these big, long, crazy spirals and loops. And everywhere we went with the shovel, we were clearing a path about, that wide behind us of clear ice where we cleared the snow. And then when we were done, of course, we had this crazy, wild series of pathways that we could skate on, zooming around in circles and spirals in different directions. Because we wouldn't clear it all at once. We would clear this narrow path first, and it was almost like a racetrack for ice skating. So we would race through these tight bends and turns, following this track we would make, and we could make a different track every time we went out there. But then eventually we would clear the whole surface, And then the hockey sticks would come out and the hockey pucks, and we would play a game of hockey out on the ice. And that was another part of the Christmas traditions. As I was thinking about doing this little fireside chat, thinking about all the Christmas traditions from my childhood, it really struck me how important that was. It was such a rich time in my life. All the family Christmas traditions and the winter traditions. And I did start to wonder where they all came from. As I said, I hadn't really thought about it before that, my mother was the source of all these traditions, but where did they come from in her life? I mentioned that earlier. I do think about that now. Did she do all these things in the Netherlands when she was a girl? And then with her family, when they immigrated to Canada, was that part of her childhood? And she was recreating it when she had her own children? I never did. I don't know if I ever asked her about that. Yeah, I don't think I ever did. So I'm curious about that now. But it also strikes me how, this is going to sound very trite, very obvious, because so many people make this observation, that time changes between your childhood and your adult years. This period of time I'm talking about, in terms of my total lifetime, was relatively short, not that many years, and yet in my mind, it's like it stretches out over lifetimes. Time was condensed, when you're a kid, and everything seems to last forever. Now, of course, time, sadly, goes by so quickly and doesn't seem to have the same richness. I even made a couple of notes to myself as I was thinking about this last night, about doing this little fireside chat. So I woke up in the middle of the night and I started jotting down some notes, things I remembered about Christmas. And I wrote something that maybe captures this. I wrote this last night at like 3 a.m. I told myself to talk about the importance of these traditions for me, the richness of it. Feels like we did it thousands of times. That period of my life feels in my memory like it stretches out over a full lifetime. I was alive and truly living during my childhood in a way that I never have since. The nature of time changed. The depth of experiences changed. Yeah, and I guess that kind of captures the mood of it for me. The richness of that childhood period of Christmas traditions and winter traditions. That's why maybe it feels so important to me now, as an adult, thinking back over it. And I do wonder if families, like young families today, have a similar feeling about Christmas in Canada right now, or was everything that I grew up with, was that unique to the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s? I don't really know. As I said, I can't help but contrast it with what I see in American movies about Christmas. And of course, I'm sure those are all very wonderful traditions for the people in those movies, but it was nothing like my own Christmas traditions growing up. We had a very different approach to it, which I enjoyed very much. Christmas in Canada for young Doug. And I think that is the end of my fireside chat about Christmas. No more coconuts have fallen down in the meantime, and I've made my way through my almost all the way through my second iced latte. I drove out here on my scooter, of course. I have it parked out there. Here at the This Is a Book coffee and library bar. So I'm going to finish my cafe latte and head back into Mae Sot. But just before I leave here, I think I'm going to go to the back and see if I can feed the fish. And I'll capture some of that video. All right, that is it. Fireside chat about Christmas traditions. And I'll see you in the next video. mentioned all the fish in the pond who gather by this porch. Oh, yeah, they're down there. They're not that close to the surface right now, but you can see, oh yeah, they are. There they are. And when I first saw them the other day, I was puzzled as to why they were all here. I mean, fish are not dumb, and they're certainly creatures of habit. So for fish to gather, that means there must be food here, at least sometimes. And when I was here before, this didn't exist. But now, on this visit, I saw this big bag of fish food, like fish pellets. And they have cups ready-made here. I saw these cups before, like I saw this basket of cups, and I was puzzled. I was like, what? I thought maybe when you finish drinking your coffee, you were supposed to put your empty coffee cups here, but it turns out it's actually for the fish food. And inside, at the counter, there is a bottle, or like a little container, and you donate 10 baht, and then with your 10 baht donation, then you can take one of these cups and feed the fish. So that's what I did. Let's take the lid off. This is so exciting. And let's see how happy we can make some fish and without dropping my GoPro. Let's just take a few in my hand just to let them know some food is coming. Oh man. Wow. That first bit got them very excited. The second amount, not as much. There's another handful. See, if I toss some further out in the water, will they know it's there and go get it? Ah, the little ones. Yeah, okay. You got to throw some out there so the little ones get a chance. Otherwise, the big ones will get everything. Let's toss some more out in that direction. And that was only that much that I put out so far. I still have all of this to go. And I have just a little bit left. I think I'm going to send it all out all at once.